Thank you so much. Good morning today to all of our panelists and to our guests on this webinar. We are truly delighted to be able to conduct this conversation on the topic of business in education and really review some of the pertinent issues that are historical, that are current and contextual, the way forward, what has been successful, what we have battled with. And we feel extremely privileged today to not only have some truly remarkable panelists, and I feel extraordinarily excited about the conversation today because I think we have a wide diversity of viewpoints, standpoints. We have people who understand the issue of education, the issue of businesses' involvement in education, what the constraints are that business is facing, as well as what some of the very powerful motivators are for the role of business in education. And I think we're going to have a diverse, interesting, thought-provoking and challenging discussion today. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome our fabulous panelists. We have with us today Kanyile Chaba, who is the Head of Responsible Business at Old Mutual, Lehlonolo Chabele, the CEO of Tebe Foundation, Riyad Abraham, who is the Social Investment Specialist at Chikalulu Social Investments, Richard Masimolo, who is not only Executive Director and co-founder of Teach South Africa, but is also currently in the role of principal at a school, and so has a very detailed and interesting perspective. Unfortunately, we were really looking forward to having Mary Metcalf with us today, and Mary has been called away. There's a family crisis which she has to deal with today, so we wish her the best. We regret not having her, but we are absolutely delighted to, at very short notice, have been able to ask James Darnold, who is the CEO of the Tomorrow Trust, as well as Lindiwe Ginya, who is the Head of Teacher Development at the Matthew Ganiwe School of Leadership and Governance, join us for this conversation. So James will participate as one of the panelists. Lindiwe has some very interesting perspectives to share with us on what is happening on the grounds at grassroots level, and we are delighted that at short notice they were able to join us. Thank you so much. Lindiwe, we do know that you are unable to stay with us for the full period, but we're so grateful to have your insights. And then we have Louise van Rijn, who is the founder and CEO of Symphonia for South Africa, and obviously some very interesting perspectives about the very gritty and real opportunities and challenges that happen when business and education engage at an extremely personal and practical level. I would really like to acknowledge every single one of our attendees today. We have a beautiful balance between people from the business sector, people from the education sector, and people from civil society in general. And we feel that it is so important that the voices of our attendees are heard. Because we have a large audience, we probably won't have a huge amount of opportunity for your actual voices to be heard. But what we have done and what has been fascinating is some of the pre-panel questions that came in have just given us a very interesting perspective on what the viewpoints are of this audience. And we would really like to invite your active engagement in this discussion. We will watch the chat box. We would ask you to post your questions, your comments, your insights into the chat box so that these can feed into our discussion and we can bring them into the conversation, really raise any pertinent and interesting points that do come up. If we could ask, we have a large audience, we're conscious of bandwidth in South Africa, so individual bandwidth and collective bandwidth. And for that reason, just wanted to ask if please the panelists can keep their videos on and keep themselves and unmute themselves when they are talking. When they are not talking, please stay muted, because we all have the experience, which I had a few minutes ago, of dogs barking madly in the background and children having fights in the corner of the room, etc. And so if you could keep your microphones on mute if you are not speaking, and just be conscious that as you start speaking, you will need to unmute yourself. For our audience, we do love to see your faces. However, when we are in our collective session, for bandwidth purposes, if we could just please keep videos off and microphones muted. When we go into the breakaway rooms, which we will do shortly after we have introduced our panelists, then if you would like to switch your videos on, you're welcome to do so, but please do keep yourself muted and participate via the chat function. Yes, so what I would like to ask now, rather than my giving a long bio for each person, I think we have a much greater insight into who the people are that are sitting on our panel when they introduce themselves. And so I would really like to invite our panelists to now take 2 or 3 minutes. Please introduce yourself, your role, your stance or standpoint on the role of business in education, and perhaps just one really interesting example that you have had over the recent COVID period, either building on work that was already happening or something novel that has come out, and your view of how that looks into the future. If we can please start with you, Kanye.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Robin, for the opportunity. My name is Kanye. I'm the head of responsible business at Old Mutual. Education really sits at the core essence of personally who I am as Kanye, and then also being the voice and the conscience of the business in terms of understanding that business can no longer stay on the sideline and watch. Very much so, business is part and parcel of how we can be part of education in providing the solutions, but also securing the future. At the back of COVID-19, I'm hoping most of you have heard about what Old Mutual's big vision is. We're developing Africa's biggest digital classroom. Again, it's because of the lessons that we have learned, but as Old Mutual, we have always been involved in investing in education. So I'm hoping I can share more in terms of what that means. But the most important issue is that education and business really do go together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kanye. Yes, absolutely. We are really looking forward to hearing more about that project. It sounds fascinating. Lehlonolo, if we could hear from you next, please.
Thank you, Robin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lehlonolo Chabedi. My day job is the CEO for Thebe Foundation, and it's truly a great pleasure to be here. And Robin, as usual, it's good to be with you. So, just probably to talk a little bit about our role as Thebe Foundation in the education space, and maybe just to put things into perspective here, to say that Thebe Foundation is a member of the Thebe Investment Group. And so as the foundation, we like to believe we are the heart and soul of the organization in terms of community engagement. So Thebe Foundation is built on key principles that were really tabled down by the founders of Thebe company. We always talk about the 4 founders: Nelson Mandela, B.S. Nodie, Walter Sisulu, Dr. Mabuza, and of course our current chair of the board, Mr. Busiganyile. So literacy and numeracy are the key areas where we work in, and we focus primarily in the foundational stage. And research has shown that teacher focus provides for the long term, that's what contributes to the key educational outcomes. So that's really what we do. And during the COVID-19, what we have then embarked upon is a process of trying to help schools, particularly because we work predominantly in rural areas. We're trying to make sure that education it's not going to be the same again. How can we then help communities to transform schools to be equipped in such a manner that they will be to deal with that? So I'll talk a little bit more to that at a later stage. Robin, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lefranolo. If we could please pass over and hear from Riyadh.
Thank you, Robin. I'm Riyadh Ibrahim from Chikululu Social Investments. I just see that my video's been stopped.
Sorry, yes, I can't. Catherine, perhaps you can let us see Riyadh again.
Sorry, Riyadh.
Which is fine either way.
Switch it on. Sorry, it was a mistake. There was something above you. Sorry, Riyadh.
No problem. So I'm Riyadh from Chikululu Social Investments. I'm a social investment specialist. Chikululu is an organization, one of the bigger organizations in South Africa that is working in social investments across a wide variety of clients. We do everything from grant administration and strategy development all the way through to advisory work on social investments, as well as investments. Approximately 60 to 70% of our total budget is across all of our clients does inevitably in the education space. And then in terms of, so I'm going to be speaking very much on behalf of Chikululu today and the work that we've been doing. On business in education, we do business is at the forefront of all of the issues that are coming up in terms of these skills mismatches and so on that we do see in education. Business are acutely aware of the skills mismatch. Businesses are acutely aware of many issues that unemployment crisis does pose to South Africa. And we do see businesses as being very important in the role that it plays in terms of helping to drive curriculum and more education systems in the country. And this is especially pertinent with regard to the fourth industrial revolution, where we are seeing schools as systems that do need to be part of a greater data system, a greater centralized system. And we see the need to help capacitate schools in that way. And we think that business is one of the key role players in that. In terms of the COVID response, we've seen, obviously we work with quite a few different clients, so there's been fairly different strategies. In general, most of our clients have been particularly interested in helping schools with the immediate relief, the PPE and so on. But at the same time, there is also a greater discussion about now that we're starting to unearth some of the discussions around digital education, and that we are starting to also break into, the difference between 4IR and what that means for schooling and that in the future versus just the technological stuff, which, everyone has been putting into schools. And that's been an interesting space of conversation. And clients that are now looking at fourth industrial revolution as something real, something that's happening, but not something that's necessarily going to involve, devices in all kids' hands and so on. It's going to involve working with school management, with school leadership. And that for us is very exciting. And it's with kind of those lenses that I'm coming into this conversation.
That is thrilling to hear. I think it is an amazing opportunity for us to re-examine what 4IR means and what the difference between online education versus digitalized education is and what is required for change management. So thank you. Really looking forward to that conversation. So then if we could please hear from Richard. and just to have Richard Masamolo's insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, for the opportunity, and thank you to the panelists that have taken time to be here today. I'm one of the co-founders, as explained, of Teach South Africa, and also an executive director, but also a principal of a school after having left the public service the past 15 years. And I think the role we play here as Teach South Africa, and in the context of the conversation today, is that we founded Teach South Africa on the basis of mitigating the risk and the shortage of scarce skills in the education sector. And that has taken us almost 10 years now to get to the grips of this dire shortage and brain drain of the education experts and teachers that are very solid and good in delivering the content. What we had envisaged to do, and which we have seen achieving over the years, is that mobilizing and attracting young people in the system is very key and critical. And with the current COVID-19 situation, where the bulk of our teachers are 50 and above, exactly fall in that category of those people that are vulnerable. And the system is at a point where it's actually on its knees in terms of demand for young people and skills. And Teach South Africa fulfills exactly that. We are getting calls left and right where we need substitution for teachers that the system is not having. There's no database of available people. And we have actually become the go-to kind of organization. And we have found that it's helping in creating and opening spaces to allow young people to enter the system. We see ourselves as a talent development entity, a corporate sector-led initiative, because we believe in the public-private partnership. There's no NGO or Section 21 company that is going to fully succeed in its mission and its endeavor without the support of the public sector. And Teach South Africa, we are proud of the companies that have came through. I'm happy Kanye is here, and Chabadi from Chikululu, who also have been in the support of Teach South Africa. Just to mention a few, Exaro, Altron, many more other organizations, because we believe that interactive learning with the support of strong internet access for our children, for our teachers, for our schools is very key. And the ambassadors, because these are graduates that come from our universities, they are techno-savvy, they are young, they have the zeal to succeed. They are really what is wanted and what is needed to mitigate the skills gap and the shortage in the system. And I believe Teach South Africa at its 10 years now is much more in need and in demand for more support from corporates. You can imagine how difficult it is to compete with the likes of Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and many other engineering companies for these graduates that are in the gateway space of learning. Your BSc engineering graduates, those are the kind of people we're looking for, because we want them to address the issue of maths and science and English with IT in the learning space, which a lot of our teachers who are older now are battling with connectivity. This divide is here and is going to stay with us. We have no choice now. We need to migrate. Online learning is not going to go away. All teachers have to find a way. As we stand now, 26,000 schools that are public are battling to get into online learning, whether it's Teams, whether it's WhatsApp, even if data is made available. skills is an issue. How do we train our people? How do we support them that they become comfortable to migrate and use technology to the advantage? There's so much content out there, and we think Teach South Africa is better posed now to fill that gap, and it requires the support of private sector. Being a principal, I'm back at it. I've been a principal 15 years ago. I'm back at it. I made a conscious decision that I need to go and play right at the center. As a middle fielder, as a leader, as a motivator, I am now seeing it with my eyes that solid leadership in schools is going to be a game changer. It's going to be a game changer, and we're not going to do it alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. What an inspiring introduction. And just, I think this is the power of this moment, the excitement of seeing things that many people in the sector are aware of, suddenly becoming extraordinarily apparent, and the support that is required for our human skills development and change management really coming up front and center. So thank you so much for that. I would now like to ask James Donald if he would please introduce himself. And James, thank you. We are profoundly grateful that literally in less than 12 hours notice, you were able to step into the gap. We know you are a good friend to this education sector and to our organization as well. And thank you for taking on that ownership of this moment. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. I've got a timer here. Everyone else did a great job in doing it in 3 minutes. So and Riyadh, your picture is much better than mine. So I'm glad mine doesn't freeze. That was an impressive photo you've got. I'm James Donald. I'm not Mary Metcalf, which to be honest, I'm disappointed myself. I was actually very excited. You know, she's the reason I signed up. I know Partners Possibility well and Symphonia. The rest of the panelists are amazing. But I don't know Mary personally, but you know, she's very careful on her Twitter to say, you know, her retweets doesn't mean she endorses, you know, what she's saying. But those of you who follow her, she's had this really powerful theme, or two themes. I don't know if she'd agree with me, but over the last couple of weeks, she's been talking a lot about what does a more just society look like post-COVID? You know, how do we build something that's different and that works for all of us? And the other thing she talks about a lot, or she retweets people who do, is this idea of resisting market fundamentalism, you know, so trying to understand what is the role of business in our society, what's it supposed to look like. And I think all of us understand that. We wouldn't be on this call if we didn't, you know, but the truth is, and I've realized it in my journey, I've always been lucky enough to work for nonprofits that help young people find their identity, meaning, and purpose in life. You know, Teach is a fantastic example of a program that puts young people through these experiences. And I think the truth is, you know, CSI budgets in total in South Africa are like 7 billion a year. They're going to hit a cliff next year. They're going to fall, right? Government alone spends 30 billion on tertiary education, you know. So the truth is NGOs are a powerful place to innovate and try things, but they're not going to scale solutions. Business or government is going to scale solutions. So the two things that I really would love people to think about is, think about you personally, what made you who you are today, and you'll realize, you know, education is an environmental outcome. It's these combinations of challenges and support throughout your life, and these tiny moments when a boss, a cousin, a friend, somebody made you think differently about yourself. You know, it's creating those opportunities. We can each build a new system every day as a teacher in our classroom, as a, you know, leader in a boardroom, and so it's about the fourth industrial revolution. There's a powerful quote that I don't want to get wrong, you know, but Steve Biko spoke about how the West's great gift to the world is an industrial and a military look. And Africa's great gift is going to be a more human face, right? I mean, you read that language in the World Economic Forum, for goodness sake, of all people, that the real truth of industrial revolution's change is about the dropping in price and the raising in technology. Now, the technologies we need are social ones. PFP is a fantastic example about that. How do we work together? And then the power in the digital stuff is twofold. It's primarily a massive, massive drop in price. I mean, our ability to create what Kanye talks about, like these massive classrooms. We're working with Huawei and Vodacom to create these opportunities for our learners. We found out yesterday that a coalition of people, the DBE, eCubed, the people who put together the WhatsApp lines for CULT, we're going to be working on a WhatsApp line for education with the Lego Foundation, because the work that we do with individuals, we can scale from our 100 learners, to literally 400,000 teachers in the country that are each trying to figure out, how to respond. So I'm so excited to be here, and thank you very much for having us, Robin.
Thank you, James. That was great. And so appreciate your also mentioning some of the other powerful actors in the sector. I think really, really appreciated hearing the eCubed, and what really strikes me, and I think we're all aware of, is this profound need for the humanization of this sector, and the care that needs to be taken that our technology serves us. It doesn't define what we have to become. So thank you for that. That was great. If we could hear from you, Lindiwe, I know you're only going to be with us for a very short period, but we would love to see your beautiful face and hear a little from you. Lindiwe has a very interesting position, so I would love for you, Lindiwe, to cover a little bit your own experience, your current role at Matthew Ganiwe, and if you can perhaps touch on your Principals Alliance that you have formed with a number of the female Soweto principals, and just let us know what's happening in that space. That would be really interesting.
Robin, this is Catherine. Just, I think that Lindiwe may not be with us at the moment, but...
All right, no problem. I suspected when there was radio silence that might be the case. Fantastic. So Louise, then over to you, and we would love to hear from you about where PFP is at the moment, where Symphonia is standing, and just your perspective on this conversation.
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Louise van Rijn. I'm the founder and CEO of Symphonia, and then the founder of the Partners Possibility Program. So what's been interesting, a really interesting experience for us over the last 4 months, has been to be in very close contact with the principals at the coalface. So principals like Richard and others. We've got about 1,300 principals now in our community. It's been that feeling of walking alongside people who are in the trenches fighting a war, and just being confronted with how unprepared we all were, but specifically the leaders of these schools. So a few things that struck me about our experiences. So we had to, like overnight, move our entire program from a face-to-face, very intimate support structure to a virtual support structure, which none of us thought was possible. So in many ways, we were resisting this change as much as anybody else. But in doing that, it was as if our principals kind of felt empowered to go, well, maybe I'll give this a go. And they started to join Zoom calls and did training courses on Zoom and WhatsApp groups, etc. And because they had the experience of personally benefiting from this, they felt hugely inspired to go and do this with their teams. So we found that, we thought that the work we were doing was to train people in, time to think and consulting skills and all that. Actually, what we did was we were creating an opportunity for people who felt uncomfortable about how their comfort levels, as Richard was saying earlier, their comfort levels in this virtual space. And so that's the first thing, is just creating that opportunity for people to experience the virtual space in a way that feels warm and welcoming and human. And then the other thing that we saw was just the amazing value of access to people who are not in the trenches. So principals who were able to call a friend, and those friends are typically, they're partners and they're in business and they're not in schools, and they just have a different perspective and have access to you know, resources, where not financial resources, but people who could help with masks, or people who could help with food, because, you know, these very practical things, instead of people waiting for some generous funder, they could tap into their local community. So the idea of local community support to people in the front line has been a very powerful experience for all of us who've been involved in that. And I can talk about that for the rest of the day, but I won't. So let me stop here.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Louise. And thank you also to Symphonia for creating the opportunity for this conversation. Thank you to Catherine for helping us to organize it, but really I think creating these forums, and there are many that are happening, and I think it is profoundly valuable that we have these discussions and that we are enabled to have these discussions in virtual format with a very broad range of diverse stakeholders at this time, because I think, as we all do, that this period poses an incredible opportunity for transformation. And hearing you speak about, you know, the fact that the major resistance to change has been removed. There is no option about engaging with technology. We have to do it, and therefore we are sitting with an incredible opportunity for reframing our future. But it does require capacitating the people on the ground and welcoming them into this opportunity alongside us. If I could please just do a little more housekeeping at this point before we break into our breakout rooms for our conversations. I just would like to make everybody aware that this conversation is being recorded and will be available following the discussion. I'm really pleased about that. I think we will all be, because I think there will be a rich input from the session, and I'm sure we would also like to hear what happens in the other breakout rooms if possible. I also would like to invite everybody on the call to please retweet the information that's becoming available. I don't know if you could just pull up the Twitter handles and the social media handles for us, Catherine, so that those who are on the call are able to retweet, to participate, to post the information that we are hearing. And we will also post in the chat group the Twitter handles, etc. I think it's an incredibly valuable format for spreading the conversation wider. And so our Twitter handle is @PFP4SA, as on the bottom of the slide. And the hashtag for this event is Business in Education. So let's broaden the conversation beyond the people on this group and post widely, and let's see if we can get wider input into the ongoing conversation. And so at this point, what I'd like to make us all aware of is that we will be moving into a period of breakout sessions. We have 3 breakout rooms. On your registration, you were asked which breakout room you would like to participate in, and so we have pre-allocated those rooms for ease of management. The 3 breakout sessions will focus on the current challenges and opportunities that we face at this point at various levels of the system. Obviously, we can't cover them all, but we've tried broadly to look at the reality on the ground and in schools. What is the real life experience at this point in time that is being felt and experienced at the level of the school and community? And what is the conversation in these spaces? What is happening? Where do we see the constraints, the pain points, and also the opportunities for our future? Then we are looking at partnership and collaboration interventions. So the reality on the ground and in schools will be a conversation between Richard, James, and Lindiwe, if she is able to join us, which I certainly hope she is. Then we will be looking at sort of the mid-level, so partnerships and collaborative interventions that are happening at school level, at circuit level, at district level. What are these partnerships? How are they working? How have they reformatted to cope with the current crisis that we face? what are some of the profound lessons learned, and what is seen at that level as the opportunity for the way forward for these types of engagements. That conversation will be between Louise van Ryan and Letlonolo Chabele from Tebe. And then the third room is at really a strategic and policy framework level. So looking at business strategic approach to their role in education, sustainability, and impact. When we talk about sustainability, we're talking about what are the approaches that will lead to a developmental approach that will be sustainable, that will endure, and will grow past the actual intervention itself. And impact, what does impact mean? And again, at that level, what have we seen over this past period? What have the lessons been that have been learnt? And how do we see these opportunities going forward, really seizing this moment in time, which is a window of opportunity for profound transformation? And what role does business play at a strategic level in how they want to engage with that opportunity? And that session will be led by Riyad and Kanye Chaba, so Riyad Ibrahim from Chikalula and Kanye Chaba from Old Mutual. And each of these sessions will be facilitated. So the first session, Reality on the Ground in Schools, is facilitated by Komala Pillay, our new program director for Partners for Possibility. The second session of the partnerships will be facilitated by Tambu Mazenda, who is the sustainability lead for Symphonia for South Africa. And then I will moderate the third session on strategic intervention, impact and sustainability. And so if, as we go into the breakout rooms, we could just bear in mind, we are looking for engagement. We want engagement. And we would like to invite you to actively participate in the chat function. And we will feed all of that participation through to our two panelists who will be basically in conversation, but we don't want their conversation to be self-directed. We'd like a little challenge from the audience to guide us there. The breakout sessions will be 25 minutes, well, 30 minutes long, but at 25 minutes we will have an indication to say that we will be wrapping up in 5 minutes, just to give us a chance to graciously exit. So sorry, I see Catherine says they are 25 minutes long, to graciously exit so that people are not cut off midstream. And then we will rejoin a main session. And the purpose of the rejoin is to have a very robust conversation that draws on all of the thinking that has come out of these breakout rooms, and really allowing these three different spaces to vigorously engage with each other's reality. And hopefully this will allow for these different perspectives to deeply inform one another, so that we can get a large strategic overview picture and the opportunity for collaborative conversation. Thank you, everybody. That 60 seconds appeared to go by extremely fast because there were still 40 seconds left on our side. So I'm hoping that we all were able, in that brief, what felt extraordinarily brief in our session period of time, to start getting to some of the really gritty issues in each of these different spheres of our discussions, and engage quite strongly. And it's not stopping now. We would like that level of thinking and engagement to continue into this space that we've entered into now. And so we have just under an hour, probably 50 minutes now, to participate with each other in a broader conversation and bring together these three strands of what we've been discussing. So what's happening on the ground, what is happening at a practical sort of meso level around partnerships that are actively playing out, and then what is happening at the higher strategic level at DBE, big business, policy making, impact orientation level, and how do they integrate and talk to one another, and what are we finding that's in common, and where are we seeing the disconnect? And so what I would like to invite now is that we have ongoing audience participation, please, via the chat function. Your input is, we have some really remarkable people in our audience. Well, everybody is remarkable, but we value the thinking. We want diverse thinking. So please do continue to participate via the chat, and we will do our level best to incorporate the comments coming through there. What we would like to do now is just take a few moments, reconvene with one another, and let's hear from the panelists who were in each of the rooms what their big takeaways, 3 or 4 points at most, that you heard coming out of the conversations that you have just been in. And let's start at grassroots, because grassroots is where it all happens and extremely important. So Richard, James, and I assume that Lindiwe is not with us here because I know she had to leave at 10:30. But Richard and James, if we could hear from you, perhaps start with you, Richard. What did you hear emerging from the conversation in your breakout room?
Let me unmute myself. What I really have picked up from the conversation, excuse me, and listening to James, the issue of connectivity, data access, and remote learning is very key. And Louise and Kanye, I think we need to find a way of, and I know PFP has the muscle to can wrestle hands. We need to find a way how schools could be assisted. You know, just to get training on Microsoft Docs, how to use Microsoft Docs, or how to confidently for the teachers to be able to use WhatsApp. Usage is something else. Data availability is something else. We can make data available, but is it going to land in the hands that will benefit to use it? So for me, resources goes with training. And that is very critical. Like I've just mentioned, almost to the close of the breakaway, Mshukantambo has been identified as one of the schools that should benefit from Wi-Fi connectivity across the school. I already have bandwidth. It's there. There is fiber, but the signal is weak. You get the signal coming and going. You don't get smooth connectivity. But once the department from DBE can wire the school in such a way that we are Wi-Fi active every corner of the school, and you see that happening to other schools, it will change the entire complexion. So for what I have picked up from the breakaway is that we need to do more on that, Donald, to really ensure that schools are able to take advantage of technology. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Richard. James, if we can hear from you, what were your 3-4 really strong takeaways from this session?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can also focus a little bit on technology stuff, just a few things that we've been realizing, and just some tips and tricks to think about. So again, the thing with technology, I mean, to Richard's point, is that all of us need to be comfortable learning and relearning, and it takes a little bit of time, but it's not that difficult. So trying to make sure that somebody who has the appetite for just getting stuck into Zoom, for example, and how to teach with Zoom, has the support to do that. You know, so if a school or an NGO, you know, if you can afford one 300 Rand a month contract for someone to have 40 gigs of data, you know, give it to the teacher that really wants to do this, and then help them really get comfortable and learn and just share with others. The thing that people miss a lot is that the rate of change in the technological space, it's also the price of things is falling really fast, and the ability to kind of use free services is getting more and more. So there is lots of stuff out there, but how to actually use it and then convert into something meaningful, it gets really complicated very quickly. So some tips on the data side: prepaid data is obscenely expensive, even with the wins that we've been having recently around data costs. So if there's any way at all to get onto contracts, it makes a huge difference. So some of the service providers have COVID special contracts at the moment that are not 24 months, they're only 3 months. And so really look into those, because you can get as much as, an hour of Zoom takes a gig of data. So, and a gig of data prepaid is 100 Rand, so like, it's crazy for me how much prepaid data costs. There is a movement to try and get more zero-rated services. So if you look at a website called freely.org.za, the DG Murray Trust has been campaigning to try and coordinate good online resources and then to lobby as a collective for those to be zero rated. So have a look at that website. Not all of them are zero rated yet. Siabula is zero rated. That's maths and science from almost any network. It doesn't use your data. Vodacom's eSchool, which is built on a private system called TopDog. Really good, caps aligned. It's got videos, got everything. From a Vodacom SIM card, it's totally free. Those are two things I'd focus on. And then the last one is just this WhatsApp initiative that I mentioned. It's just been signed off this week. We're going to be working really hard on it in the next month or so. And the idea is that it's a WhatsApp line that teachers particularly, but anybody can reach out to for help around information, support, and then basically the line would curate the kind of resources and information that you're all asking in a way that's easy for teachers to get access to. And so please reach out to me. That should be kicking off pretty soon.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just going to check the comments coming through. What I am quite interested to know coming from that grassroots level is what is the level of comfort and what is the level of overwhelm amongst educators, but specifically at our non-urban schools, which I think, Richard, you may have insight into, amongst the general educator population around some of the kind of the fundamental Maslow's bottom of the hierarchy pyramid issues that they face, and how is that impacting on their ability to even start to engage with the future focused for our realm. Richard.
Yeah, fortunately in my other life, I sit on a board of an independent school in Limpopo, which is a comprehensive school from grade R to grade 12 called the Future Comprehensive School. And as a board, we took a conscious decision over this lockdown and allocated 500 Rand to each teacher every month just to sustain the Zoom classes. Now, school next door, which is a government school, doesn't have that opportunity for a principal to can make available such kind of money. Even if that money is available, the teachers there are not even able to use smartphones to get onto WhatsApp areas. And that's where the issue for me of deliberate deployment of resources to teachers and train them. They will learn as they move on, but they need to be a deliberate act of saying, this is a resource on your hand, and this is how we can use it. For me, that will take us somewhere. When we checked in the independent school that I've just talked about, for having made the 500 Rand a month available to every teacher to do WhatsApp classes, the past 3 months of the lockdown, our children in that school have been able to go through WhatsApp, such that we have not lost much. That even when we were reopening, was a question of we need to go into the normal where others are going, but it's not a question of catch up. We're already there. Coming back to the school where I am in Gauteng, in an urban area, which is Soweto at Mshuka Ntambo, the situation is different. The teachers tried on their own to do WhatsApp calls, but they could not sustain data. The children at home are battling. Some have smartphones, some don't have. So the point that James is making is very critical. We can have all the platforms, Vula, Vodacom, WhatsApp, Zoom, but if data is not there and the teachers are not confidently able to use content that is uploaded to these platforms, it's not going to take us any far. We are made at the point where we are to depend on face-to-face contact. And that's why we are now seated with forcing to get children to go to school. The minister made it very clear. We have no other choice. Other schools in the independent space, in the private space, have done much, but the majority of our children in the 26,000 schools are forced to go face-to-face and fight the COVID risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point to have in our mind, that there's a tech conversation and then there's a whole other conversation about really this is just completely out of the realm of much of our population currently. If we can then move please through to our second chat room and just get a quick overview of what the key points were that came out of these discussions. You know, what do you feel the value of the intimate engagement, collaboration and gritty kind of cross-sectoral business and education engagements are? What has been particularly noticeable and prevalent over this period of COVID? What do you see the value of this type of engagement as being as we head into the future? If we could please start with you, Leshonolo.
Thank you, Robin. The time moved so quick. I think we needed a bit more time. We noticed there was a lot of discussions around collaboration, and I think Louise started talking to what really resonated with me about a collective theory of change. What that does is that it says we could have 10, 15, 20, even 50 players for all you know. But when we have a collective theory of change, we can then, each one knows what it is that we are going to be doing. But most importantly, we are going to be holding one another accountable. And I think it is important then, when it comes to partnerships, when it comes to even the approaches that we are thinking of doing, that we put collaboration at the forefront of everything, that we need to be very intentional. And we talked about conducting some kind of assessment on the ground. And I gave an example from the Tebe Foundation, where we are currently doing a test of a model called Tebe Foundation Integrated Community Development Model. In that, we are very clear that we are not going to be doing everything, but we are also clear that we want to know who are the key players, because then as we start addressing the needs on the ground, we will then be cooperating and working together, and hopefully our money will go a long way when we collaborate in that way. There was a good example, not a good example, but I think a recommendation, that's the right way to put it, that I would really like to put it here to make sure that it's minuted and we take it forward. That is building a coalition for education. And that is really identifying the players on the ground in a particular area where we are in, and then how best can we then formalize a structure like that. Obviously, we would want to ensure that government is at the center, it's part, and by the time we are done, we are hopefully the systems, the structures would be a bit better. I think those are the key things that came out, Robin, that I can talk to. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Interestingly, I think that really came out also, this need for compact, for collective visioning from the group that I was moderating. Louise, if we could hear from you, what were your top 3 or 4 takeaways from your conversation?
Yeah, so this point around what does it take for collaboration to work in a region? We shared some of what we've been doing with the Coalition for Quality Education in the Western Cape, and I think there was quite a lot of interest in that. And so for me, the 2 key takeaways is that we need to share some of our lessons. It was always meant as a work in the Western Cape was always meant as a practice, as a pilot initiative. We may want to figure out how we can share some of the lessons. And then just, the idea of a collective theory of change, because the challenge for us in the education space is that many people have lots of in-depth knowledge and understanding around curriculum and, classroom practices and stuff. But what we don't have sufficient understanding of is how to lead complex social change. And so if we're going to really tackle this as a large-scale, complex system, and we want to facilitate change and improvement in 20,000 of those units, we really need to get a bit better at being clear around our understanding and our thinking around how to facilitate that. And it means that we need to kind of, it's like, if we want to improve the performance of all the branches in a particular bank, we're not going to start by throwing IT at the issue. We're going to start with really getting clear around what's the unit of change, how do you achieve change, how do you facilitate change in each of those units, what are the key enablers, what are the kind of ways of thinking and doing that will need to change. IT will be the 15th thing. It will come, but it will be the 15th thing. Training the tellers will be the 14th thing. But there's 12 other things that we need to do before that. And my fear is that because it's like the other stuff's difficult, so we do the easy things because it's too complex to think about how do you facilitate change in 20 schools. That's what we need to do. And we have to, thank you, Riyadh, for that kind of, I hate when people's videos are off because I love seeing the kind of physical response when someone says, kind of nods his head. So anyway, that's the point is just that it's that we have to, this is a complex social system with 20,000 units that need to be addressed. And if we're going to tap into the collective input of all of the wonderful people who can do that and create this compact and coalitions, etc., we have to start by understanding our theory of change, getting clear about that, understand what the gaps are that the government simply isn't able to deal with. And then one by one, we need to change these, we need to have a change plan for each of these units. It's not rocket science, but it requires complex thinking and understanding of complex social change.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Louise. Wonderful. So let's hear from our final conversation, which really was at the level of sustainability, at strategic thinking, policy thinking, impact, etc. And from the business sector, certainly that has quite a lot of clout to start fundamentally shifting some of these issues, and just what the perspective was coming out of that conversation. If we could please hear from you, Riyadh, your top three takeaways from the conversation.
Sure, and it's really great to be saying this on the back of what Louise just said. So it was one of the things that we did discuss that I did mention in the session was the pause that many clients, many corporates have taken, the pause that they've taken during COVID in terms of their technology rollouts and all of that, where they've said, okay, let's hold back a bit and let's analyze this a little bit more, and let's look at future skilling and that as opposed to just the technology interventions. And I think it's been very useful. Another thing that came out for me very nicely was the discussion around the collaboration, and that, you know, we do have some good collaboration at the basic education level, and the department is running that fairly well and moving ahead with it much better than they've ever done before. But there was also a comment coming in about the kind of disjunct between the post-school education and training and where that is, and how business can potentially influence that space. And I think that we do need to have bigger conversations around what business can do in that space, similar to the way it's influenced basic education, and also to, you know, follow the lead of where the department has gone, because as business we are small in terms of the budgets that we do put forward towards a greater good. So yeah, I'll hand over to Kanye to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Riyad, I'm hoping you're going to be nodding your head just for encouragement. The big takeout, like everybody else, it's around collaboration. And it's also about how the business needs to take a much more bigger stance in terms of the addressing the skills gap. And I think the big thing is around to sustain education over a period of time is the what is going to be offered. So it's the relevance of the curriculum, is the understanding that we can't continue offering the same content. How do we prepare through education for a different future that will sustain the economy? And then what we shared from our side was issues including financial literacy as part of the curriculum, entrepreneurship as part of the curriculum, so that those aspects don't sit outside the normal way of offering education, because things have changed that much. And also how we choose to invest and where we invest on behalf of our customers, clients, and our partners. We need to repurpose our investments. As an example that I gave, Old Mutual, we invest over 1.4 billion in schools infrastructure, but schools are not going to be the way we know them today. So it's about how we change and reevaluate where we invest so that we talk to what is required today. And I think the big piece was understanding the need, and most of our panelists have mentioned that already. What are the needs that are going to assist us to be able to respond in a relevant manner? The biggest example that I have is there's no shortage of content. Accessibility can be dealt. I think Lishona mentioned that earlier. But how do we keep our teachers engaged? How do we keep the learners themselves engaged? And how do we make sure that what we offer in terms of the platforms and infrastructure do not become white elephants? So there's a role that business needs to play in making sure that there is continuous learning and there is continuous engagement, which is relevant to what is required today and for the sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful and really interesting to hear, you know, some of the differences, but also a lot of the similarities across the three streams. I would like to just bring our audience participants in because we have some very interesting viewpoints coming out of our audience commentary. And from Sarah Tinsel, who's head of Telkom Foundation, just a note to say that I think that the time has come for us to push for education to be firmly put on the agenda as a driver of economic growth and not so much as just a social issue. And this will require government to reorganize and reposition how we approach education in preparing for widening access to the mainstream economy. This also will have a significant impact on how we reframe curriculum in such a way that it addresses specific market demands to grow the economy. Now, I know that this was a very strong point of discussion in our breakout room. I'm quite interested to know, in the other two rooms, was this something that came up as well, this need to really take 15 steps back and look at what is the big picture and how do we fundamentally reimagine our education system and reposition it, not in words and theory, because we all know this is required, but in practice. What is it going to take for us to take that shift in approach at a very practical level? Is there anybody who would like to offer a quick comment on that point that Sarah has raised? And just please pop your hand up, either on the chat or in person, if you'd like to make a comment on that. And if not, I'm going to pick somebody. So Richard, you are unmuted, therefore I have picked you.
I think, Robin, you are right in putting that view to say that we need to reimagine where education is going to be, and how as public and private need to re-engineer, recalibrate how schools function. And I'm saying this because now I have the opportunity and the experience to be on the coalface, playing at the public space, but also comparing my experience with what is happening in the NGO space and in the private space, particularly in the low-fee private entities, wherein I see people succeeding in using very little to achieve more, but using efficient methods to do so. I can just mention an example. The LEAP schools are some of the low-fee schools that are playing in that space, that are using very little resources, but do more. And you look at Teach South Africa with the approach that they are having, mobilizing graduates with very limited resources, attracting them into the education space and placing them in the public to benefit them more. So you always have to have efficient use of resources. It doesn't really say, as we are saying, rethink, recalibrate, reposition. We are advocating for more and more and more resources. But we have to also look at the efficient use of resources and double up capacity of people to achieve more with less. And that I'm not advocating that people must scrape the bottom of the barrel to make life successful. Yes, private sector must fund. Yes, government must have a much more intentional thinking of how to change public schools' performance. And training for me is very key. I'm sure I have captured your question, but that's where my passion is, to see people becoming capacitated and be able to use resources efficiently. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm not sure if anybody else would like to comment on that point from Sarah, really of taking the opportunity that we have to reimagine in entirety what we are doing with our system. Lehlanolo, thank you. I see you've raised your hand there.
Thank you. I think, Robin, just to add to what Dr. Richard has just said, we're looking at it more from a partnership perspective. I think we are, in our group, came to that stark realization that it's really no longer about the logos and the egos that goes with it. It's about recognizing, one, that change is here, and we know it's here to stay. That we acknowledge. But the second aspect to it is that we know that each one of us cannot do everything. I mean, what Kanye is talking about, the area that they're working in, it's incredible. I would like to really follow that and see what it is they are doing. so that we can learn from it. And that's just it. We cannot be everywhere and do everything. And so it is important for us to stick to what we do, but also be able to know who is doing something else and assure that that aspect is happening. So we do need to take a step back and be very intentional in ensuring that as multiple players in the field, we know who we are, we know each other and what each one is doing, and then create a space for each one of us to be able to collaborate together. I mean, the issue of data is very critical. I would really like us to be one of the issues that we're going to take forward collectively together as we move ahead, because we know that schools cannot do without it. It's a human right issue, my daughter said to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Kanye, I see you wanted to contribute.
Yes. Before Sarah's comment disappears, I think she makes a very good point, and it's not controversial at all, Sarah. Good to have you on the line, about the fact that we exist within the continent, and why Africa's biggest classroom is Africa's biggest classroom is because of that realization. We're not a business in South Africa only. And the issues of education and challenges and opportunities, by the way, that we are facing are not only South Africa issues alone. So I think it is important that we understand and don't miss the opportunity to learn from COVID-19, that our world has just become that much more smaller, and our challenges have become that magnified, and our solutions have to cater. Yes, South Africa, but what does it mean beyond the borders of where we are? So I really concur with the point that has been made by Mrs. Ntinto.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I can feel a lot of steam building up behind this conversation. Who was that speaking?
Hi, sorry, it's from the Prime Stars team.
Yes.
Hi, thank you. We also would like to just contribute and say that this is absolutely the right direction of discussion. We believe that reinvention is a part of life. Just like any human being, from ages 0 to 10 is different to 10 to 20 and 20 to 30. We ourselves, an organization 10 years ago, had to convince the public and government that you can actually teach young people in cinemas. And we find ourselves at the next invention now, like every other organization. What we'd like to contribute to this conversation is that part of this digital migration is a lot of work that needs to be done on the ground. The schools that we engage with have said to us quite effectively that they want to be online, but there must be a balance with face-to-face. Reason being, for the last 12 years as a matriculant, you've been taught and conditioned that learning happens in a classroom with a teacher in front of the room, wearing uniform with learners to my left and my right. So there's a lot of learning maturity we need to develop in our learners. There's a lot of individual discipline we must teach our young people in terms of how to actually want to teach yourself. And our teachers, especially our teachers, need to feel as a fundamental part of the teaching process. So digital should no longer be seen as a replacement, but rather as an enhancement. An enhancement comes from a dual or hybrid or blended approach. So from our perspective, that's our focus. We are actually working on an online platform. There's so many challenges. I can only imagine what schools are facing, but it must be done with a dual approach, some face-to-face and some online, until we get ourselves to a point where the country can actually take on online learning.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think this is the thing, that it is a transition. It is a transition, and it requires close support of the human beings in that process. And it can't, we have been accelerated into this transition because of where we find ourselves. Resistance to change has been removed because there really is very little choice about whether or not we engage with the online space. But it does require management. It won't just happen by itself, and it requires human support. And I think this is very clear. The human element is so critically important when we talk about technological revolution. The revolution is the access and the ability to engage. It's not the tech. So then we have a very interesting question from Komala Pillay from the breakout session there around, are the monitoring and evaluation requirements from businesses stifling the ability to move forward innovatively and hindering rather than supporting change? And I think this is a very interesting question, and I think it speaks less to the fact that we need monitoring and evaluation. It is essential, I believe, that we have that, but more about the attitude that underpins how we manage that monitoring and evaluation. Are we controlling and containing, or are we understanding and connecting and finding ways to genuinely grow through what we are trying to monitor? So what is your stance? I think let's hear from two people. Let's hear from Louise on this question of the monitoring and evaluation requirements from business, and then perhaps if we can hear from Riyadh. So Louise.
Yeah, so I'm going to stick my neck out here and say that I think it's a real challenge, because I have been in hundreds of conversations with not-for-profits who say, well, we can't do things like develop capacity of leadership because we can't monitor that, and there isn't a clear kind of direct line between input and output, and that's what our funders want. So we're going to go back and rather do a short-term maths program that we can show that the results of the kids have gone up between January and December, and because that our funders will like those reports, and it's easy, and we're going to show no long-term capacity being built, no real change in the system, happy funders, great reports. So I think we've lost the plot with how we do M&E, and again, I said up front that I am putting my neck on the block here, so happy if anybody wants to come with a guillotine.
No, we like necks on blocks. That's what makes for good conversation. And I think we're not alone. So I think even if you look at SAMEA, which is the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association, this is the thing that they're focusing on. Are we shooting ourselves in the neck by the way that we choose to do our monitoring and evaluation? Is there a different way? So Riyadh, if you could perhaps share your perspective as somebody that is very much in the space of needing to monitor and govern what is happening and where money is being spent. What is your perspective on this?
Yeah, so it's a tightrope. It's a very difficult one to balance, because on the one hand, you do have foundations and trusts that do have trustees on it that are, trusted to make sure that the spending of the foundations and so on are achieving necessary goals. So there is that requirement that is always going to be there. And that's part of good governance practices and so on. So we have to keep that in mind, that is always going to be a requirement of any funds that are spent. However, you do also have a scenario where you've got very small amounts of money that are going into programs that are requiring huge amounts of indicator banks and stuff like that, and that doesn't make sense. The budget needs to be aligned, or the quantum of the budgets need to be aligned to the number of indicators and so on that programs do see. I do think that a kind of a close to $1 billion program does need to have a lot of indicators, does need to have strong M&E systems in it. But a funder coming through with R1 million into a program shouldn't be expecting, 10 different indicators to be measured on. And so it's about striking that balance, and it's very difficult to strike that balance because honestly, we've seen that some of the smaller funders have got more requirements than some of the bigger funders. And that's because the bigger funders tend to be more systemic in nature and tend to understand this complexity and do see that let's look at one or two goals or one or two indicators that are closely aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's what we're going for. And everything else is noise, so we're not going to worry about that. and that's a good space to be in. So we need to find simplicity in our M&E, but we shouldn't kind of chuck too much of it out when we're trying to simplify it.
Now, Robin, can I?
Yes, James, I saw that you wanted to squeeze one in.
No,
fantastic. We've got 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll try to be quick, but maybe just a thing that helped the penny drop for me around that. I mean, it's 100% true that everyone should be held accountable to what they do. I 100% agree. It's just very, very difficult to understand the bind that donors are in, because it's very hard for you to kind of align the incentives. And it's very true for nonprofits. I've seen this a lot. You know, the reality is a nonprofit that's funded, particularly through a corporate, in theory, how well you deliver against your outcomes is going to predict whether or not your funding will be renewed, right? And that's how a market should work, right? If you're good, someone will pay you for it. But the problem is, in reality, that's not really how it works. You know, the incentives from the corporates, there's certain strategies and timing and all those things, you know. So NGOs have to learn to play kind of two games. One is to kind of align with what your client needs in terms of like the donor, and that's M&E reporting and alignment with their strategy, etc. And then also what your other client needs, you know, your children or beneficiaries. And NGOs just have to be honest themselves and realize they're playing two games. When funders understand that, and many do, that's very powerful, right? They can recognize that. And even more so when funders recognize that they're funding stuff that's in their best interest, aligned with their incentives, that works even better, because then organizations can decide if they align or don't. But just the penny that dropped for me around M&E, there's a really powerful methodology around change in government called Iterative problem solving design. And basically it's this idea that if I give you a map and I say to you, okay, how do you get from the East Coast of America to the West Coast, right? That's typical M&E. You have an outcome, you know where you're going, you have a roadmap. I'm going to look on the map, I'm going to go to this town, I'm going to go to that town, okay? And that's an M&E strategy, inputs, outputs, theory of change. If I were to give you that exact same map 400 years ago, and you look at that map, East Coast, West Coast, they more or less knew where the West Coast was. They more or less knew where the Mississippi was. They knew nothing from the Mississippi to the West Coast. They didn't know, there were no maps. So how would you get there? You wouldn't set a goal. You wouldn't set a target, right? You would say, who needs to come with me? Someone who can speak a local language, maybe a cartographer, somebody who knows how to hunt. How are we going to get there? We're not going to set targets. We're going to start walking west. And when we hit a wall, we're going to turn right. If we can't go further, we're going to turn left. We're going to track our way back. And we're going to slowly make our way across, you know. And the business world uses the language around agility and, you know, innovation, whatever, user-centered design. So I think the M&E frameworks need to catch up with that, because our M&E frameworks are still designed as if we're building a hospital, right? We know what the outcome is. But in education, the rates of innovation in education are actually, as a sector, the highest of any. The rates of change in the education sector globally are higher than all the fourth IR ones, like, you know, genetic coding, etc. And then the last thing I'll just say is very philosophical too, but just understand what it means by the fourth IR, right? Take Johannesburg's example. In the second industrial revolution, the city emerged. In like 70 years, it went from nothing to one of the biggest cities in the world. 70 years driven by basically electricity and, you know, mining. Then in the next 40 years, the city's economy doubled again, from like the 60s to like the early 2000s. The entire city doubled again, right? In money and everything, complexity. It's going to double again, but now the time is halving. So in the next 20 years, what drives the economy in Johannesburg is completely changing. Now, those are the opportunities that we have, and it's thinking about it in these innovative ways. It's not saying I'm not going to be held accountable. It's just saying, like, hold me accountable to the outcomes, not to like the inputs and the tick boxes, you know, which is hard because, you know, M&E managers sometimes have to report on check boxes. I mean, that's fine too, but just, yeah, okay, sorry, stop me. Thanks, Robert.
That's okay, Jazz. Thank you. I think, as I said before, what is beautiful here, you look at 2 hours, you think, geez, that's long, and then you realize this conversation is massive, interesting, and there is a lot of vested interest in it. So what I would like to do, we have 3 minutes, and I'm going to ask for an extra 3 minutes so that we have enough time to just conclude well. And what I would like to ask is that we future focus now. So where to from here? Not what the issue is, where to from here. I think there is quite good consensus, and I'm going to frame it in the question that Matteo Turon posted, because I think this is the question. So it sounds like we need to get the right people in the room to work through identifying the priority variables that we need to improve the state, that we need to improve the state of in order to create positive change in this complex situation. What do you see as our biggest opportunity here around creating a common social compact and bringing the players into the room? And I'm going to start because I feel I'm entitled to have one quick word. For me, it's a fundamental shift in the underpinning around moving from control and fear into trust and relationship and collaboration, and genuinely shifting our mindset into one in which we want to and we continually engage in conversation with as wide a group of stakeholders as we possibly can. And I would like to hear from each of the panelists, what would you like to position as the one biggest game changer that you could imagine bringing into the space to achieve that? Let us start with, let us start in the opposite order from how our rooms went. So Kanye.
Thanks, Robin. I think the biggest game changer, James has touched on it. There's a need, especially from the business, to look at how we measure, and the measure should be around the impact rather than just the performance metrics. If we understand that why we're doing what we are doing in education, why we are investing, why we're getting involved, it is because it's about the impact that will shift the dial. Very difficult to measure that, but you still have to give the voice of business that says, how do we grow whilst we create positive impact? Otherwise, that's not responsible business. And I feel the game changer is when we understand when that will take place, and it's the work that I feel we all need to do together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If we could, I'm so sorry, I typed a question in the chat and I wasn't muted, so I do apologize for the clicking that must have been there in the background. Let's hear from you, Riyadh.
So for me, there's two big game changers here. One is, working with the school leadership and so on to help them become robust institutions moving into the fourth industrial revolution. I think that we absolutely need that. And the second game changer is going to be listening to more of what James has to say.
James, that's your intro.
No, I think I took my time. Maybe the only thing I would just say is sometimes it's just hard to draw a frame that you can kind of actually make relationships and think time around. So even though things are happening fast, you need time, So for me, like, I think being able to commit to a specific space, Johannesburg, a specific area for 10 years, I think that's the way we should be thinking about things. How do we change education to employment pathway for a kid who's like 10 years old today in Johannesburg? And then okay, that's who you talk to people and you stick to it, and then you find your way to the West Coast and don't drown in the Mississippi.
Fantastic. Right people, right place, right skill sets around you. Bring in your friends. Thank you so much. Let's hear from you, Louise.
Yeah, so for me, the game changers are linking to what James just said, is these regional coalitions for collaboration, and then those regional coalitions to be learning from each other. I'm all for having the long-term conversation around, what does the future of education look like? And I'm very conscious of the fact that we've got 12 million children in the system in 25,000 schools today. And so for me, there's what do we do this year to improve the prospects of those children? Because there's a real danger that we're going to become so future focused that we're going to not deal with the very significant practical things we can do this year.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's really great. Richard, let's hear from you.
Thank you. I think my panelists have said very profound things here. For me, honestly, the game changer should be helping schools to build winning teams. that is very critical. It's very difficult to lead an organization that doesn't have a culture of working together and has a vision and a mission that they've set for themselves to achieve. Otherwise, you just work haphazardly. For me, that's the game changer. Again, also, when we do M&E in schools or in NGOs, we also not have to overlook the anecdotal changes and achievements that are made by the work that the organizations are doing, as opposed to ticking boxes. M&E sometimes can cause mission drift, because funders would want you to follow a particular path because they're funding you, and lose touch of what as a game changer want to achieve and help you on that journey. And I think James have covered it well. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful. Yeah, the value of qualitative M&E that actually shows you the journey path, that how you are developing this map, to use James's analogy, rather than just which pit stop you've stopped at, which is perhaps possibly a way of looking at quantitative. And let's hear last but not least, very importantly, from you, Lehlanolo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Robin. I think for me, there are two key points that are coming out of this. And I'm going to premise it by stating that real development takes time. And so if we are going to use education as an entry, and in fact, somebody suggested that, in fact, it's about time we advocate for education to be elevated as a key component for economic development. I think we need to be very, very, very intentional about what I'm going to call developing a critical path for collaboration. Be able to be very clear when we go into areas that we are not going to do it alone. We are willing to be able to sacrifice our own logos for the benefit of achieving impact. And so for me, that is very important. And I am going to be following up with you, Luis, around this collective theory of change, because I love it. So thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you, everybody. And so very sadly and very rapidly, we have come to the end of our 2 hours together. I have posted a question, which is now kind of far up the chat, just to ask, please, and we will ask this in our follow-up correspondence as well, we would love to know if you would be interested in continuing having a series of these engagements and expanding it to others, because this is still a very small subset. So please do respond. We hope that you have found this session valuable, but not only valuable in terms of being interesting, but quite challenging to each of our thinking about how we intend to proceed in our own individual ways on improving and supporting the education space, and how we could do that better. So I would like to just say thank you to every one of our panelists. And I would like to say thank you to every one of our audience, because the audience is such a critical component, and having such an engaged and interactive audience has been absolutely fantastic. You know, we at Symphonia, generally we try to always have events where every voice is heard, and it's a little bit harder when there are 100 people in a virtual platform. But we do want to make it very clear that every voice of every participant is very important on this platform and in this engagement. And thank you for your presence and your collective thinking with us. And just to say thank you so much to Catherine Hill, who coordinated and set up this really valuable session on behalf of Symphonia for South Africa. Thank you to each of the organizations represented, and thank you to each of the individuals who have participated. We look forward to an ongoing engagement and to many more conversations, because conversation is the starting point of all effective change, and we are not alone. We all want to reach the collective why. We all want to achieve the collective what. And perhaps what we need to focus on is the how. How are we going to do that? How do we remain in conversation so that our thinking stimulates and coalesces into something very powerful? And I think that is that from us. Catherine, I'm not sure if there is anything that you want to add in from your side that I may have missed, but just to say thank you all. We appreciate your presence, and be well. Go into the week, and may your thinking have been deeply stimulated.